Thank you very much. We'd like to share with you some ideas, a project we've started conducting within our division, and Victor is the head of this division, part of the group. For 6 months we've developed internally a product with the aim of identifying the security level of solutions offered in the case of Sandbox. The public providers, service providers, they talk about total virus analysis with the objective of improving, trying to see. Well, there were 3 goals. First goal was to see if when we are conducting one of our processes, if we're able with our devices to avoid them, to skip the supervision. On the other hand, we were looking for finding intelligence from the sandboxes and from the service providers, the way they detect, the way they work, because it will be interesting to avoid the control and to apply this intelligence in our own sandboxes. The sandboxes we use for our own organizations. Thirdly, it is interesting also to try to envisage if it is possible to know who's behind a sandbox, who the organization is, who the analyst is, who the engineer is, analyzing the sampling. Because that's important, because within the process there is a first step, recognition. Recognition shouldn't be there only. Identifying workers, identifying servers, identifying the websites and so on. Recognition is very important, and it should be focused on the protections and mechanisms the client has and or our target we're analyzing, because you have to adapt your techniques, your artifacts, your devices, your codes, your malicious codes to it. You have to get adapted to it to be able to escape security, to avoid security patterns, because if not, our success rate wouldn't be as high as the one we expect to have. So if, for instance, I know that my opponent, they have a solution, and with an analyst using a platform, a sandbox platform, I try to adapt my artifacts to escape. And we're going to try to identify our artifacts that are within a sandbox. It was motivated by a paper we wrote. It was breaking security, machine learning. I recommend this for you to break security issues. And applying machine learning, they're able to identify if the artifact is executed in a sandbox or not. And we would like to know if it is necessary, if we have to apply this to be executed there, and to tell us if it is a sandbox environment or not. And then we wanted to identify also in this testing process who is facing us, who the security tools are, who the analysts might be, analyzing our samples in case the sandboxes, their security tools were not connected to the internet, so our attack, we won't have a return from them, a reply from them. And how are we going to do this? Architecture, we have the artifact, we put an online platform this for the analysis, and we get the information back, compiled into our structure. How we've done this? We've done this with the Shark because it works with the Windows environment, are able to compile information without any problem. To filter this, how will this work? It starts executing commands. You can have scripts, you can simulate their behavior. We would like to have a mirror image. They should identify our device, let it classify this as malicious, and then we will get more results. So we made it real. We had a macro to execute, to download and execute it, and to be classified as malicious. How about the information compiled? All the information directories, lists of programs, program files, Windows characteristics and modules loaded, If they were focusing on process users, the amount of processes, the base plate identifier, and then we had here the Word document. Thanks to Visual Basic, we could identify a power share, we could execute all the process, and we would then, in the end, we have the artifact that we have constructed, we have developed the artifact. The bug was created by us, and it's uploaded to an analysis platform. We compile all the information possible, and it is conveyed to a server. It is our server for analyzing results. What about the objectives? We would like to look for the most total virus, hybrid, any.NET, run, all the sampling devices to be analyzed, classified here. And among the 15 possibilities, 8 answered our requests. The other ones were not analyzing the behavior of the samples, or the sandbox had no access to the internet, so we had no contact from them. Those in green were the ones answering, ones replying, and in red, those were not. From total virus, 13 connections. When we upload the artifact, we received 13 executions, connections to our infrastructure, filtering data, and then you get a sample, and in the end, when you analyze the behavior, you don't see all the sandbox analyzed. You have a background process and its availability or not. They will analyze the different samples, and we have requests 1 hour after uploading the sample, 3 hours afterwards, 2 hours, 6 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks afterwards. Having given the samples, they establish contact with our infrastructure. Each sample had an identifier which was uploaded to Total Virus. We've done this to the devices to have the correlations. We collected all the information in a platform, analysis platform. We had the origin, IPs, and variable data, usernames, what we've mentioned before, everything compiled here to be analyzed afterwards and to make conclusions out of this. This is the example of a post-information analysis or post-processing. We have compiled all the information. We want to know if they were executed within a sandbox or not. The article, the paper referenced here, used machine learning to see with neural networks if the artifact, according to the request to the infrastructure, was executed within a sandbox. Checkpoint here had the Bible of how to evade sandbox. They give different tips. The typical users, John, Walker, Amin, allowing us to know to a certain extent if you are within a sandbox or not. You have to combine many of them to have relations that are able to establish conclusions. This is quite wide, there are many papers, but we wanted to know if this makes sense. We can simplify this. If you have a malicious device and you want it to work and you have many checks to see if they are executed within the sandbox, Antivirus will classify this directly, even though they might not know the hidden part of it, the malicious part of it. They will give a classification as malicious, and we wanted to avoid this. Then in the end, we have here 37 results of connections of single IPs. No, 37 results of connections. Out of that, we have single IPs, 27 single IPs out of the 37. Out of 15 providers, 8 established connections with us. And then we started with the analysis, and we saw that out of 37, 6 did not hide the manufacturer. You could have a check with the base plate. You could see the Mac, you could see the SIM, you could see using Word, or you would know this is a virtualized environment. You would have a first possibility of knowing if it was a sandbox or not. 37 executions of the artifact, 37 different sandboxes, different environments. There are lots of sandboxes. It's 37 different sandboxes. Then another check we saw is that when we tried to obtain the RAM memory of the device, we got 0. In a normal device, we got normally a response, but in many virtualized environments, we got 0. The RAM was not calculated properly. 10 out of 37 had erroneous calculations and give wrong classification. Another interesting data is that IPs did coincide. We have 27 single IPs out of 37 shared IPs. When you go to Total Virus or SNLBox, as example, they have contracts with third parties. They give samples to other sandboxes that will analyze the artifacts and classify those internally. In the end, those contracts will have, the providers will have contracts within the same company, will have the same outgoing IP. If you analyze, you have the same parameters. They were looking exactly the same. We have the same number of processes, 50 processes. We upload to Total Virus, then ERAM to samples, and they went into a joint sample with the same IP. How would this be? This did end up together. We're sharing infrastructure. Those were my hypotheses. So there are third parties giving information, and they put a sandbox to retrieve information from them. Another check that was interesting is the number of processes. Out of 37 results, 36 had less than 85 processes, and the mean was 50-60. MetaShield went over 100. In execution, and if your artifact is, when you have a time in execution, you have many more processes. With this, our team realized that the difficult thing was to count processes. We've checked this in different environments with commercial sandboxes. If our artifact identified this within a sandbox, we realized that the logic approach we had protected, checking the number of processes, allowed us to be on the safe side. With this, we could ascertain if we were within a sandbox or not. Many of the free of charge and many commercial sandboxes too. And we have identified all the elements here, and they do not take this into consideration. They do not calculate this in the sandbox. They get values that are 0, they get values that are null, that are not correct. And with this, we've seen that with machine learning, in the end, it will be a most, and in principle, there is a simple checking of the processes, and we can keep the logic of our artifact on the safe side. Second motivation was if we could obtain intelligence on the way the sandboxes did work, to be able to avoid them, to be able to apply the intelligence to our own sandboxes. What we were using at our lab, within the lab, we're using this. And we decided, okay, in the execution time that our artifact is there, we're going to try to filter as many elements of information as possible. And we're going to try to filter the information from files that are interesting, .yara, VBS, Python, and so on and so forth. Those files that are related to the way they hide, the logic that they are within a sandbox, to have the analysis on what's been executed. And those 5 minutes that they give us, we have different threads, different important elements, compiling information from the network units that were assembled in some internal machines, and we filtered this, the security or safety analysis of the sandbox. We have the infrastructure that goes to the sandboxing engine. We get results from the execution, and in what we have assembled on the internet, we uploaded all the files from the sandbox, everything, one after another. And we got from the sandboxes 874 files, 874 different files. Which information was there in the whole of the documents? There were documents that were correct documents, legitimate, to give legitimacy to the virtualized environment. They simulate, they mirror the user for instance, emails, PDF of something he might be working on, trying to simulate something, information that is fake information we're not interested in that, but what is interesting for us, other things, for instance, we have registration key to be able to set the serial of the manufacturer, the buyers, or the name of the manufacturer, and they change and they put ACEs, for instance, the office configuration, the Acrobat Reader configuration to delete all the security issues, all the checks, the macros and everything should be executed then. Information or files that are associated to trying to hide the sandbox as such. We have lots of binary files and scripts from deployment, internal environment, changing IPs, or for this to establish registries. And then we have lots of elements, scripts that are referring to the analysis, those that consider to show at different interfaces that this process calls this one, and the dynamic part is able to be analyzed, and then we download this to see the way they work. We have lots of binary third parties, Falcom detectors, messiahs, to be analyzed deeply, and binaries for simulation of different behaviors, like here, user imitator.exe. It's a mirror image, and that's useful for us, for our sandbox, and also it's useful for evasion to say, well, if I see there is a user imitator that works this way, I won't execute this. And there is a package of intelligence, and that was important for us. Lots of SSDIP to classify families of malware to 100,000 malware families. We have here detection elements that were for us important and significant for us, useful for us, because we're here presenting the way they detect the sandboxes. And as a conclusion, we saw that there are lots of information, fake information, but other part, that's intelligence, is very useful for us. We realized that many times they have network units and they can interact with other elements of the machines that were internally located there. And some of the intelligence was at share units in other devices. The bug took this. We wrote there. It wasn't possible to write there. So we tried to execute a second bug to see if it was possible again. And now the information was there. After the snapshot was reinitiated, restarted in the two cases, the information wasn't there. It's like the other side, the other machines virtualized, executed this in the proper mode, and the information was not there. So we continue. We know if it is a sandbox or if it is not a sandbox. We've seen the intelligence there. Now we would like to identify the owner, the entity that's behind, who's trying to obtain intelligence from any total virus and so on, and all the information that's useful. And in general, we would like to see who's analyzing the samples, not only with the IP, because the outgoing IP is from Russia, China, the United States. That gives no information. The sandbox, in general, is not in the internal network of the user. But we would like to know who's behind there, and we would like to know if it is not connected to the internet, we can see that the artifact's been identified, the company that's behind, who's analyzing what, who's analyzing our samples, and this is advantage. If we know information on who's analyzing us, then you could try to respond to this, to be proactive, and then we could try to escape out of a sandbox. We could even try to act on the people analyzing our malware sample. We had the first amount of processes. We know if they're connected from Fortinet or not, if they have a type of antivirus, Python, or whatever. But it was not enough. We wanted to know more. We wanted to go beyond that. We wanted to take the leap to get more information. So we swap and we looked for a different approach. When you get a sample, you analyze the behavior, we see there are requests, processes, directions contacted. If you have a PowerShell and you have your address, that's reflected in the interface. We have the strings, and then we think, could we control the information? In reality, as attackers, we could try to infer who the analyst is, new artifact here, and then we're going to interact with the interface of the analysts with the shark.net. We keep trying, and it was not enough to have the alert. We wanted to have a tracing. We wanted to know if they had opened or not our samples. We wanted them to open our scripts for the first identification as a snapshot, capturing a screen, the code of the page, whatever, what was visualized to be identified. We got it from the XSS Hunter. We got a framework, and they uploaded the scripts, and we were able to see if they had used our samples. We prepared the code. There were lots of calls for them to have the strings, for them to have PowerShell calls, and we have the payloads, JavaScript payloads to trigger calls. The analysts haven't seen this. If there were vulnerability, they will execute the payload JavaScript in the navigator. We had all the possibility, but without breaking this, the header was kept. We put the content in the command line, executed everywhere. Where we identified the visualization, it was able to execute to this cross-site. We put names like Emotet, we get BlueKit, whatever, for people to open and to see if it was vulnerable. We wanted analysts to open this and to say, BlueKit, let's see, let's look at it. Let's see if there is a new way of vulnerability, new mode of vulnerability. But the total virus wouldn't give us what we wanted. Bot. First of all, our goals, our objectives. We, out of the 15 goals we've chosen, the ones given more information to us, total virus, hybrid, and this third one. And we see why we took this as a guest star. Virus total, the interface didn't show total virus, but when we took this other Sandbox, they had analyzed our sample. We took the full report. When we see the report, we see that something was not properly represented. We opened the different tools, the different navigators, and we saw there were requests to our framework to upload the scripts. All of a sudden, we saw that that was executed really. Yes, we got a persistent footprint. Yes, we were trying, those were our IP data, but whomever would say, well, they were identifying this. We notified Google, and they tried to solve the problem. 2 days afterwards, our artifact was analyzed in another Sandbox. We hadn't uploaded anything. We opened the full report part, and then they were breaching again, and we got the same thing. This captures with the same XSS Hunter that sent payload, the capture, to the cross-site analysis panel. We had contacted them. We said we haven't done anything, but it did happen. 2 weeks afterwards, our sample was analyzed somewhere else, and we put a full report here, and the page was very active and uploading our cross-site. We called back to Google. We told them again and again. At the end of the year, Google added a new project there, and the YouTube box, and the YouTube box told us that that was exploding. They took our scripts, vulnerability again. We tried to notify this again and to tell them that happened again, and we told them, total virus, okay, we'll stop here. We're going to try any.run, and we saw the page was okay. No JavaScript tag, nothing. Everything was perfect. Everything was perfect, but we saw while visiting this that there were requests to our infrastructure, and we realized that in the graph regarding the calls. The interface was okay, but they were loading our payloads in PowerShell commands. If you opened this, they were loading requests. We notified Amy. And then we got here the alien vault. We looked for the domain and we wanted to see if that was indexed in Google and to see if our sample was indexed. And we got alien vault people. We went into their interface and there were funny things. Once again, trying to ask things from our infrastructure. On the 25th of December, they were patching the web application. And who's analyzing our sample? Who's analyzing our samples? When you see the Sandbox, online Sandbox, it appears generating reports that are considered by analysts to have an API according to what you pay, according to which third parties could integrate resources into their own applications. They can download the artifacts. According to what you pay, you get more services or not. In the end, and parallel to this, there was a day where we found this with our interface.
So we didn't upload the sample in any other place. So an antivirus company had obtained the information from our sample and they had analyzed with their internal application. They executed the payload and they sent a screenshot where the page is located, the internal data to our infrastructure. But let me explain this a little bit further because it's not easy. So the antivirus company connects to the API of VirusTotal and they download our sample without us knowing that. This sample is executed in a sandbox, internal sandbox of this antivirus company, and they have a visualization internal interface. And this internal interface execute, and they send us a screenshot and the analyst of what the analyst of the company is watching at the moment. So it's easy to put it in your navigator and send it. So what you see is the screen of the security engineer of the security company. So you are watching their internal analysis platform screenshot. The screen is breached because we were trying to make it explode. So we had 10, 15 payloads. So the page exploded everywhere. So if you know what the vulnerable payload is, you can mask a little bit the results. You don't have to destroy analysts' websites. Was it the only thing? No. China arrived. So all of a sudden, some requests from China, an internal request. So in the middle, you can see our app with XXX persistent. However, we took the capture of their internal application. We took also the HTML, the DOM, with all the information of third-party samples, parameters, chains, etc. So this is the Chinese screen. This is the screenshot of a Chinese analyst. Not only that, we found also this one who was analyzing this sample with requests from our infrastructure. So these are the Chinese in their organization, in their security company. This is the internal application of this security Chinese company to analyze samples they consume from Total Virus or VirusTotal. How many visits were made? We were counting the data for the request, and we came to the realization we had 3,295 cross sites from Chinese IPs. So results are many, but due to time, we assumed that because we were uploading many payloads, many could be executed in one view. So we reduced time, so 220 from Chinese IP, followed by 10 from Hong Kong. So China is investing in people and in resources to analyze malware. So see how many visits from Chinese IPs or analysis infrastructures. So what do we do with all that? We were not able to find any vulnerability, no cross-site or anything, but we contacted Google via VirusTotal. We contacted any.run and Avid Void. So what is the next step? We want to get more data because we see new sandbox services. As an debug we want to analyze everything and mapping everything to know how they work. We want to explore new forms. We focused on Sandbox Windows, but you have also Android, Linux. Can we replicate these attacks on these platforms? So sooner or later, we want to open our database. We have updated our website. So we are going to open our database for people to consult. So people will be able to know if this sandbox belongs to this company and what the information belongs to this sandbox. So what we are trying to do is to provide services through a website. So you can send the artifact to your target. When the artifact is executed, the artifact is going to tell you the security tools the target has. If they analyzed this and this was analyzed by an analyst, or if they have an antivirus cast, or if they have Symantec. So with this information is really valuable, because when you are going to prepare your artifacts, you will be able to know the evasion or eloping. So conclusions, general conclusions. We see that through simple checkings like the one we do, counting processes, we evade 90% of sandboxes. So count process, less than 85, it's a sandbox. This is the check, the easy check you can do, and you don't need machine learning to be able to reach the conclusion that you are in a sandbox. Am I saying machine learning is bad? No, I'm not saying this, but it's excessive sometimes. So by conducting this checking, which is easy, you can evade. It is possible to access to the intelligence of sandboxes or public sandbox services, so we know how they work and copy from them. Why not? And then, for journalists in the room, for their headlines, how is China obtaining intelligence from malware? How they have infrastructure that download from public services of sandboxes, continuously sandboxes to extract intelligence from malware. To do what? To copy their techniques, to know how adversaries attack, how their cyber weapons work, etc. So it's very significant. So the difference between China and the other countries is huge, because they are obtaining malware to get from malware all this information. And lastly, and this is a little bit fearful, especially and I'm wearing it at 52 intelligence, we are executing malware, etc. How do we deploy our internal analysis environments? I'm sure a lot of people in the room have their isolated sandbox, but the interface, this is where you see results. The interface, it's an internal organization tool. So this internal team is part of the organization, right? So, but beware, because attackers might try to target you and your team. For example, the bad guy is here. I send my artifact with all the things we included. So the blue team executed because it's really appealing. They run it in their internal sandbox. So a report is generated, and of course they want to see the report. When they open the report, wow, that's a problem. Persistent malware. So you are attacking analysts' core directly. So beware when you visit samples. Virus Total or other platforms or samples of your internal sandbox, beware, because you might be affected via these artifacts. Thank you very much. Is there any question in the audience? Yes. 2 questions here. Congratulations, that was very interesting. So it's not interesting, it's more than interesting. Question. Did you get any personal conclusion? I think it's complicated. If China is investing money and resources heavily in that, how is this possible for them to contact your teams? You are not protected. A firewall from China is what exactly? Well, first thing is they invest in analyzing malware, but they don't invest in filters or security policy. Basic things that would limit a normal attack, but we realized that they didn't have it. They were vulnerable because they had limitations. The firewall you mentioned is not active, apparently. So if firewall exists, more samples have been blocked. However, what we are saying is that there's a great number. China is really interested in getting malwares from the Western world. And then, Javi, you said the machine didn't send anything after the analysis. The hybrid analysis machine was not vulnerable in this case. Congratulations, it was great, it was good. The question is basic. I guess in the sandbox you don't execute as administration. When you patch, when do you patch? And how often do you patch? Some sandbox could be executed as an administrator, so you could do whatever you wanted. Actually, some other sandboxes did not. I don't know exactly if we patch and how often we do that. But the escaping environment from sandbox is traditionally by breaking the virtual machine. But this is really done, and a lot of people are investing in that. So we wanted to attack the analyst interface, and we saw, but this should be interesting. And when we saw that, we saw there's a long way to go. Patching now, it was outdated. A lot of them were on Windows 7. Most of them are on Windows 7. So it explodes. So the level of patching is lower. So the registry key to make macros to be more vulnerable, the better. Is there any other question in the audience? So because they are here, go ahead and ask. I think there's no more questions. Yes, there's one question there. Hello. I joined the previous congratulations. It was a very interesting presentation. Thinking about you are saying, if I understand, vulnerability is going to be a regular cross-bind. Have you ever thought of using SQL payloads for when the results of the sandbox will be inserted into the results of an analyst, you will be able to have something more persistent, not only viewing that on the panel? That's an excellent idea. We explored the network, we saw this, we studied this, but you have limited time to execute things, and this is when you have a reduced time. SQL, I've never thought about it. I think it's interesting. Trying to find other teams or resources is interesting. The XSS Hunter framework gives you this option. First of all, a screenshot, and then whatever you want, script or whatever. So you can play with that. You can compile the pages in the environment of the analyst, especially those that are accessible. You can play a lot with that. We didn't want to attack other people, so we limited things. But the SQL idea is very interesting. We didn't exploit the network recognition pathway to see if you can jump from one sandbox to another one. So, but some of the services should be exposed from the virtual machine and the physical machine, and the environment where you have a deploy files and snapshot generation creates persistence in order not to have the only 5 minutes of analysis when you are analyzing. More questions from the audience? I cannot see from the stage. No more questions? Thank you, Roberto and Victor. That was wonderful to have you here and share with the public and with the audience, I'm sorry, your ideas. Thank you, and give them a round of applause.